When the summer rolled in, I didn't think it would end the way it did. I had always loved mom and dad. They were strict, sure, but at 18, I had never attended a party with other people my age. I hardly had the luxury of spending time with any of my peers at all, and I had their rigid Catholic values to thank for that. The risk of getting corrupted was too high, they said, but I loved them, and they loved me despite it all. They showed that to me often, and while I always enjoyed their affection, I couldn't control the lingering, nagging voice in my head that would always ask the question that made me afraid. Would they still love me if they knew the truth? How would they react if they knew their sweet, innocent son, whom they already pictured becoming the perfect, loving husband to a perfect, God-fearing woman, liked men? Would they still love me the same? It was something I worried about often, and it practically tainted any positive interaction I had with my parents. I know I said my parents were the reason I never spent time with any of my peers, but honestly, part of it was my fault. I never fought my parents on the strict rules they imposed on me because I wasn't really interested in doing so. I hardly had the desire to interact with the people around me. I hardly had the desire to do much of anything. School was a drag, and so were most of the people there. I only put in the bare minimum effort when it came to schoolwork, simply doing my best not to fail. My days were monotonous. Wake up, go to school, come home, go to bed. Saturdays were spent at home, Sundays were for church. Rinse and repeat. The only person that added any sort of color to my life was my older brother, Augustine. We were close, but even he didn't know my secret. It was something I could barely accept most of the time, and when I was able to acknowledge it, all I felt was guilt. Sometimes, without warning, I would be gripped by a very cold and existential type of fear. I would think to myself, is this really my life? Something has to happen. I can't keep living like this. Something has to happen. Then nothing did. Until one summer, when my life was turned upside down by a single declaration from Augie. You know that art school that's opened up for the summer? I signed you up for it. He said it so casually that my brain didn't register the absurdity of his statement until a second later. I looked at him in shock. The art school? I was sure the disbelief was clear in my voice. Augie, be serious. I am being serious, Angel, Augie insisted. The summer's just begun and I'd rather chew grass than watch you spend it wasting away in this house, he said, frowning at me from where he sat on the couch. I couldn't really argue with that. Okay, fine, but why art? I asked. You draw, Augie said. I did, when I was like 12, I responded. You were good at it. You should pick it up again, Augie said, and I knew his mind was set. From the sounds of it, my parents had already given their approval too. Eventually, it started to sound less and less horrible. It was in a different neighborhood, a change of environment from home and school, and the occasional trip to the store. Emotionally, I was many things, but one thing I definitely was bored. I decided to go along with it. Of course, my parents would have never agreed to me attending a secular program. Gifted Fingers was a Catholic institution, one that specialized in helping young people cultivate their natural God-given gifts. So, of course, it wasn't going to be a completely foreign experience, but I was excited on my first day regardless. I expected a lot of things. I expected to maybe make a friend. I expected to get better at my art. The more negative side of me expected the entire program to be a boring waste of time and energy. What I never expected was him. I spotted him immediately in my class. He stood out like a sore thumb, with his ripped jeans and pierced ears and tattoos on his deep, mocha skin. When he spoke loudly, and when he laughed, it sounded like music. I learned his name when our teacher called on him during class and kindly explained that the clothes he had on were against the rules. This would happen several times for the rest of his time at that school. He simply rolled his eyes, barely acknowledging our teacher's statement. Young man, Mr. Wilson asked, his kind smile growing noticeably tight. What's your name? The guy sat up straight and stared at him definitely, not bothered by the eyes of the people around him. Roman, he answered firmly. His name cemented itself in my mind. He was so completely different from anyone I had ever seen. Really, I'd only seen guys like him on TV, on shows that my parents definitely didn't like me watching. As the lesson went on, the attention that had been on Roman was eventually drawn back to our teacher. I couldn't help stealing a glance at him every now and then. And at one point, he caught me. He looked right into my eyes and, after a pause, he smiled warmly at me. I quickly looked away. I probably looked awfully rude to him, staring at him and then looking away when I had been caught. But in truth, I was just startled by the way his smile raised butterflies in my stomach. I'd never felt anything like that before. Still, no matter how fascinated by Roman I was, I definitely didn't have the guts to just go up to him and talk to him. For the first couple of days, I only watched from afar. It became clear to me very quickly that he was just as rebellious as he looked. He continued to wear what he wanted, much to the frustration of our teachers, who tried everything that they could to get through to him. He would attend classes consistently enough, but he would almost always skip midweek mass. By the end of the first week, everyone knew his name, even if they weren't in our class. A few days later, one clear afternoon, we were tasked with practicing still life drawings of nature. With our entire class set in the wide grassy lawn in front of the school building, we were told to select something to draw. I decided on a bush of hydrangeas near the wall. I sat alone in the shadow cast by the building. Suddenly, I heard a voice coming from beside me. "Oh, is that what you're drawing? That's cool. Do you mind if I draw it too?" Surprised, I looked up from my sketchbook to see none other than Roman strolling towards me. He was, once again, eye-catching as ever. He wore a dark beanie, which seemed to be one of the many hats he wore to school every day without fail. Without waiting for an answer, he sat, his own sketchbook resting on his crossed legs. "I don't think drawing the same thing as someone else is against the rules or anything," I mumbled in response. Curiously, my gaze dropped down to his notebook as he flipped it open. I was shocked by the amount of skill I saw in those pencil drawings, compared to my never progressed past middle school skills. I immediately felt inferior to him. What was he doing here? What could he possibly learn? Judging from how he had been acting up to that point, I couldn't help but wonder if he was there against his will. "Oh, wait," he suddenly spoke up, leaning forward to get a good look at my face. Almost instinctively, I drew back. "I know you," he continued. "You kept staring at me on the first day." My cheeks grew warm from embarrassment. Guess I had been even more obvious than I had thought. Sorry," I apologized. "You just kinda stood out, I guess." "Yeah?" Roman grinned, arching one pierced brow. "I get that a lot. You seem like you try really hard not to stand out, to the point that it just makes you stand out more. I don't think I've seen you, casually chat with anyone else here." I shrugged. I had tried my best to talk to some of the other kids, but it was much more difficult than I had expected. At that point, I really only did when it was absolutely necessary. The other kids seemed to sense this too. They generally left me alone. But sitting beside Roman, who just let his words fall out of his mouth, I was left with not much of a choice. "So what's your name?" he asked me, turning back to the bush and starting his drawing. The movements of his pencil on the page were so quick and smooth that I could barely keep track of them. Angel," I finally responded, turning back to my page and starting my own drawing. My pace was significantly slower. "Angel? Nice." Briefly, he stopped moving his pencil and squinted at the bush, tilting his head. "You live around here?" "I guess, just a couple minutes away," I said. "I live in this neighborhood. It's just as boring as this place," he complained. "You don't like it here?" I asked, unable to stop the genuine curiosity I was feeling. Roman smiled wryly. "I thought I had made that pretty clear to everyone. I just want to draw with other people. But now they're adding in all this boring stuff? Why does what I wear matter? I'm an artist. We dress weird. We act weird. We see the world differently. That's our entire thing. Why would I want to be like everyone else? Life's too short for all that, you know?" I didn't. At least, not at that moment. I didn't know what it was like to be actively rebellious. I usually just went along with what I was told because that seemed like the easier thing to do. Just keeping my head down and moving through life with as little conflict as I could. Meeting someone who seemed to have a completely different view of things was a bit of a shock, to be honest. Sensing my confusion, he gave a slightly apologetic smile. Sorry. I'm really passionate about that kind of thing. It must sound like I'm speaking a completely different language to you, he said. I mean, I understand what you're talking about, I responded. Do you? Roman laughed that melodic laugh of his. Because all I see when I look at you is a textbook definition of a good boy. For some reason, I felt oddly defensive. It was one thing for me to know what I was, but for someone I had barely interacted with to clock me so quickly and accurately made me a bit embarrassed. I'm not a textbook good boy, I insisted, even though I knew deep down that I was mostly talking out of my behind. Roman called my bluff. His smile turned impish, and he leaned in, a twinkle in his eye. Yeah? Then prove it, he said. Skip mass with me next time. I stared at him. I had no idea what kind of expression I had in my face, but it must have been a pretty funny one, because he burst into laughter. See? I knew it. Judging from the grin on his face, the offer probably hadn't been genuine to start with. Had he really just asked me that to see my reaction? A side of me that I had purposely put to sleep stirred, just slightly. You just surprised me, I insisted. I'll do it. Really? It's gonna be pretty hard. I found some good spots to hide, but I think the teachers have started to figure out that I have no interest in that kind of stuff. They'll probably be looking for me, and if they find you with me, you're gonna get in trouble too, Angel. His tone was sing-song and playful, like he could tell that the idea of getting in trouble was much scarier for me than it was for him. And it was, but all I could think about was how badly I'd been wishing for a change of pace. What would be a bigger change of pace than this? So, huddled up together with Roman in that corner, I made the decision that would change my summer into something I wouldn't have been able to come up with even in my wildest dreams. We didn't get caught. Roman had found some pretty good hiding spots. We spent the entire time together in what was once a music room, surrounded by old instruments covered by white tarps, that gave us a good place to duck and hide into whenever we heard someone approaching. We sat together in the dark room, listening to music. Since we were sharing Roman's earphones, we had to sit so close that our knees would occasionally brush against each other. Each time they did, it felt like a jolt of energy was sent shooting through my body. I was so nervous that I could feel myself sweating under my t-shirt. But I was excited. This close to Roman, I could notice little details on his face that I hadn't seen before. Upon closer inspection, I could see that he had slightly dark circles under his eyes. I noticed the small birthmark under his lips. He didn't just stand out. Roman was handsome. Handsome in a way that made me feel dreadfully plain in comparison. See? He whispered. When he smiled, the corners of his eyes creased slightly. It's not so bad, is it? Oh, I guess not, I admitted a bit shyly. Much more fun than sitting in that boring sermon, isn't it? He continued. Well, I don't know about that, I started to say, but my words were interrupted by the sound of the door starting to open. I almost froze up from shock, but Roman acted fast. Just as the door swung open, he slipped off his chair and dropped to a crouch, grabbing my hand and pulling me down with him. There's no one here, a teacher's voice. Are you sure you saw him go in here? I'm pretty sure, sir, a student's voice. I vaguely recognized it, but I couldn't connect it to a name. It looked like Roman could, because he scowled as in recognition as soon as he spoke. Maybe you saw him go somewhere else, Ben. Or he might have left some other spot. That guy seems to be as slippery as an eel, the teacher continued. Let's go back. I'll talk to him after the service. With that, the door shut again, and both the teacher and the student walked away. It was only after their footsteps had completely faded into silence that I was able to breathe normally again. And it was only then that I noticed how close I was to him. Startled, I shifted back. Roman stood, still frowning. "Did you hear that?" he muttered. "That Benson guy tried to snitch on me." He was one of the boys in our class. He was a major teacher's pet, but he gave a lot of grief to the people he saw as weak, or that he tried to manipulate. He often got them in some kind of trouble so he could blackmail them. I saw him as nothing but a power-hungry bully. He's totally obsessed with me. It's creepy as hell. He turned to me and leaned down to offer me a hand. I grabbed it and pulled myself up. I had thought that after skipping once, I would never want to do it again. I had been sure that my nerves wouldn't be able to handle it, and it had certainly been scary. My heart was still pounding even after the threat of us getting caught was gone. But it had been a rush I had never experienced before. A rush caused by both the situation and the way Roman was grinning at me. This was not the last time we skipped together. Some days later. From that day onwards, Roman and I started to spend more and more time together. I would like to say that I didn't fall for him so hopelessly or so quickly, but if I did, I would be lying. I was completely enamored with everything about him. For the first time, I had something to look forward to. Just by spending time with him, I was able to understand him a bit better. I was able to understand that he wanted to live his life to the fullest, without being restrained or restricted by anyone. "Maybe that's childish," he told me one day, as we lay together on the lawn during break time, staring at the cloudy sky. "But that's really how I feel. People get so caught up in worrying about what other people think, worrying about what other people will say, and they don't even realize how much time they're wasting just by doing that." Some of the other boys had started up a game of soccer on the other side of the lawn. I wasn't particularly athletic, and Roman seemed very tired that day. Some days he looked more tired than usual. According to him, it was because he didn't get enough sleep some nights. I turned my head to look at him. "What do you mean?" He propped himself up with his elbows to look at me. "Okay, look at it this way. I'm mixed race in a predominantly white neighborhood. I don't even have someone to call a dad because my so-called grandparents couldn't stand the idea of their son marrying a black woman." I frowned, but I said nothing. Roman had already told me of his home situation at that point, so I knew he was trying to make some kind of point. I already stand out enough without even doing anything. And yeah, I could try to hide from the world because that might be more comfortable or whatever, but the thing is, he sighed. "You know how you look at a clock and the second hand is always moving? Like it's always ticking?" "Yeah? What about it?" I responded. "That's seconds of your life going by, constantly. And eventually, those seconds will add up and eventually, your life will be over. We just have a couple of decades here, Angel, at best." He lay back down, staring at the sky. "We can't afford to waste it." His words had a bigger impact on me than I knew at that moment. A few days later. One morning, he intercepted me right as I was about to head to our morning class. "Hey," he whispered, coming in to stand close to my side and leaning down so he could speak closer to my ear. "You want to go somewhere else for a bit?" I looked at him in shock. He was asking me if I wanted to skip classes for the entire day? Probably spotting the shocked expression on my face, he smiled. "Relax, I don't mean for the entire day," he said. His tone was soft, as if I was a small animal he was trying to scare away. As he spoke, he set a hand on my lower back, guiding me away from the crowd of students heading to class. "Just for an hour. There's something I want to show you." His proximity and voice made me blush, and what he was suggesting made my heart pound. We had skipped mass a few times at that point, and I was getting used to it. But I had never done anything as brazen as skipping class completely, not even with regular school. And I guess since it wasn't regular school, skipping wasn't as bad, but still. "What is it you want to show me?" I asked. "I found something cool on Saturday. I want to share it with you," he answered, and his smile was so sincere that it might as well have pulled my heart right out of my chest. The fact that he had experienced something and was insisting on sharing it with me made my cheeks heat up in a way that must have been visible. Helpless to the effect the other boy had on me, I said yes. We sat for the first period, but as everyone moved to their next class, He grabbed my hand and we ducked out of the building unnoticed. Down the street we went, until he took a turn and pulled me into an alleyway. "Try to be quiet," he said as he suddenly lowered himself to a crouch by the wall. Confused, I did the same thing, wondering what this cool thing was supposed to be. I tried to ask him, but he held a finger to his lips and pointed to a spot near the large trash cans. It was then I noticed something small watching us. A black and white cat. It looked wary and frightened initially, but when Roman pulled out what looked like cat treats from his pocket, it lowered its guard and approached us. I watched as he hand-fed it for a bit, before dropping the treats on the ground and letting it eat from there. "I found him eating in the garbage the other day," he explained. He moved back and pulled out his sketchbook. He opened it, revealing several sketches of the same cat in front of us. "I call him Moo, because he looks like a cow. I told our local shelter and they're gonna come take him in today. So I figured I had to show him to you before then. You like cats, right?" I did, and while I definitely thought Moo was cute, there was something there I liked more. We sat together for about 30 minutes, drawing Moo together. It was surprisingly good practice. Weeks later. Now, I would like to say that I hid my feelings well from him, but Roman was perceptive. Or I was just hopelessly obvious. Either way, he caught on to the fact that I liked him very quickly. At the end of the first month of the art school program, I purposely stayed behind a bit later than I usually did. I knew I would probably worry my parents a little, but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make. After all, Roman had told me to stay behind and talk to him after school. Initially, I just assumed he wanted to tell me something inconsequential. But when he took me to our meeting spot, the old music room, and told me to stop trying to hide how I actually felt, I couldn't argue. And when he held me by the waist and pulled me into my very first kiss, I couldn't do anything but kiss him back. I didn't want to do anything but kiss him back. The guilt that had been eating me up for most of my life multiplied by tenfold. As we continued to deepen our relationship in secret, all I could think about was how I was going behind my parents' back, lying to them and keeping secrets from them. I felt like a disappointment. I'd worry endlessly about what would happen if they found out the truth. And while some desperate part of myself was begging me to put a stop to what Roman and I had, I couldn't. Not when every moment I spent with him felt so right. Not when, for the first time ever, it felt like I had finally found someone who understood me. So, if no one found out, it would be fine, right? If we could just keep going on like this, then it would be okay. That was my reasoning. But some things are like summer. No matter how fun and wonderful and life-changing they might be, they have to come to an end. It started with Benson. Well, I guess that isn't entirely accurate. It started with Roman and I not being particularly aware of our surroundings. Roman had never been one to pay attention to details on anything that wasn't his art, but I was usually more careful. Usually. But there was as careful as I could be when I was in the bathroom, huddled into a stall with Roman as we kissed. This had also become one of our frequent rendezvous points. So lost was I in Roman's warmth that I didn't hear the door to the bathroom slowly creak open, nor did I hear the footsteps that walked up to our stall. I didn't hear anything, really. Until a sharp gasp sounded out from the outside of the door. Shocked, Roman and I separated as quick as a flash. He flung the door open. Standing on the other side of the door was none other than Benson, the boy who was trying to bully Roman and doing all he could to get his attention. Fear gripped me, while Roman exploded at him in anger. "What the hell are you doing, you creep?" He sounded angry, but I could feel his hand shaking. He was nervous. Naturally, Benson attempted to blackmail us. "I'll keep this a secret, but you have to do whatever I say for the rest of the summer." And naturally, Roman refused with some rather colorful language. The next several hours were agony. Benson marched right to the school director's office with us in tow and told him everything. The school director, Father Francis, or Padre, as he liked to be called, didn't even dwell on the fact that Benson had been sneaking into bathroom to bother people in the first place. All Benson had to do was tell him some lie about hearing weird noises and wanting to check if everything was alright, and Padre moved on to start drilling Roman and me with questions. I tried to deny it. I tried to hide like I always did, but Roman didn't give me the chance to before he snapped back at him. Yeah, Angel and I are together, so what? I love him and he loves me. You can't control who I love, and you're not going to persecute us for it either. You've all got misplaced priorities. He jabbed a finger in Benson's direction. You're more focused on our love than the fact that this kid had been borderline harassing me for weeks now. He literally tried to blackmail me 5 minutes ago. Padre turned to look at Benson in surprise. In response, the boy shrank back. Frightened, I reached out to touch his shoulder. Roman, calm down, I said, but he shook me off. No, I won't. It's messed up. He paused and suddenly looked very tired. The dark circles under his eyes seemed to grow even more prominent. He paused to take a deep breath, as if he had exerted himself. It's messed up the way that we have to hide. Angel, don't you see that? I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing was forthcoming. I kept glancing at Padre, at the stern expression on his face. This only made Roman grow even more frustrated, and a look of hurt crossed his face. He sighed and walked past me, storming out of the room without another word. I turned to follow him, but... Not so fast, Angel, Padre said, stopping me in my tracks. I turned back to look at him, and my heart sank when I saw him reaching for his phone. I believe a talk with your parents is necessary, he said, and suddenly, all of my worst fears had become manifest. Hours later, I was back home with my parents, wishing the ground would open up and swallow me whole. And I was so happy you had made a friend at this place. I didn't know that this is what you've been doing, my mother yelled, practically hysteric. How long has this been going on for? My father demanded. I sat there, terrified, not knowing what to do. Would they kick me out for being gay? They looked angry enough to do that. Answer the question, he snapped. About a month, I stammered out. That made them both pause and look at each other. If it's only been a month, then this can be fixed, my mother finally said. He's still young. Sometimes these things happen. My father didn't respond, but he was staring at the ground, deep in thought. He was obviously considering my mother's words. This can still be fixed. I played those words in my head over and over again. It was obvious what she meant. She was suggesting that I go back into hiding, that we pretend none of this ever happened. I would be forgiven. Just a few weeks in the past, the fact that they would be willing to forgive me if they learned the truth about my sexuality would have made me happy. But now, it only filled me with a deep sense of frustration. I couldn't go back to living the way I'd been, especially since the truth was already out. I couldn't keep living this way. Moved by bravery I hadn't known I had, I shakily rose to my feet and yelled, "I'm not something that needs to be fixed!" Both my parents turned to me in shock. My legs shook, but I didn't back away. "This is how I am," I forced the words out. "You can't fix me." My mother's gaze softened. "Angel, sweetheart, no. You're just a little confused is all. You just need to remember the scripture. We all have sin in our hearts. We can..." I shook my head. "No! This is how I am." My father spoke up next, rising to his feet with anger on his face. "Watch your tone, young man. Your mother and I are only trying to do what's best for you." "I don't care. I'm not wasting my life hiding from myself anymore." At this point, I could feel the tears in my eyes spilling down my cheeks. "If you can't accept me, then reject me. Kick me out. Do your worst. I can't take it anymore." I sniffed, staring at them expectantly. But they didn't say anything else. Still crying, I ran out of their room and into mine, shutting myself there and crying into my pillow. To my surprise, they didn't disown me or kick me out. They did ground me indefinitely and take away my phone, separating me from Roman and putting an end to my rosy summer. I didn't even know what happened to him. It was miserable. Augie tried to reach out to me, but I avoided as much conversation with him as I could. I couldn't stand the idea of him being disgusted with me, just like our parents were. The only good news I got during this period came from him, when he told me he found out Padre had suspended Benson shortly after the whole ordeal, after investigating and finding out that Roman's claims of being bullied that day had been true. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I did something I would have never imagined I'd be able to do. I snuck out of the house when everyone was home, and got on the night bus to Roman's neighborhood. I knew his address, and was able to find his house with little trouble. There, I was answered by his mom, Valerie. As soon as I introduced myself, a look of deep sadness crossed her face. She told me that Roman wasn't home. She told me that Roman had been admitted to the hospital, that his cancer had worsened significantly over the summer. She told me that she could drive me to see him if I wanted. She told me a lot of things, really. None of them sounded real. I wondered if it was some kind of practical joke. Roman? Cancer? I knew he couldn't physically exert himself a lot, but I never would have guessed he was ill, especially not to that extent. It didn't make sense. How could someone so full of life be that sick? Suddenly, his life's philosophy made sense. Of course he would want to live to the fullness of his life. Of course he wouldn't want to waste any seconds of his life. It made sense on why he always wore a beanie, and why he always looked so tired and exhausted and sleepy. Even the dark circles under his eyes seemed to be pointing out this very fact. Roman, the guy who'd finally promised a change in my life, had cancer. A guy who promised me life was soon going to lose his own. And I didn't know of it. But he had known. He had known he didn't have many of them left. Roman's mom drove me to the hospital. There I saw the truth. Roman laying on his hospital bed, frail, his eyes shut. As soon as we entered the room, he opened his eyes. When he spotted me, he laughed weakly. It was like a ghost of the vibrant laugh I had come to love. I was really hoping you wouldn't find out about this. At least, not like this. I stayed by his bed the entire night. At some point, his mom insisted on calling my parents to at least let them know I was safe. I told her to do what she wanted. No one was going to pull me from Roman's side, not even my family. When they arrived, I told them just as much. I love Roman, I declared. We were away from his room now, sitting in the waiting area of the hospital, and I'm going to stay with him until he feels better. If you guys won't accept me, then I'll just leave and find somewhere else to go. I didn't know where. Roman's mom had offered to let me stay with her if things were rough with my family, but I knew I couldn't impose on her for long. But I was steadfast in my devotion to Roman. He needed me to stay by his side, and that was exactly what I was going to do. I could see my parents were worried for my safety, and I didn't want to worry them anymore. So I followed them home for the night, but I insisted that I would be coming back the next day. Some days, Roman was so weak that he was like a shell of his former self. Some days, he was able to sit up and talk to me normally, and sometimes it almost felt like things had gone back to normal. One day, as summer drew to a close, we sat together in his hospital room. He seemed energetic, laughing and joking the way he usually did. I hate that you have to see me like this, he said, rubbing a hand on his head. I bet I look completely unsexy. I laughed. I wouldn't use that word to describe you, ever. Roman smiled wryly. Even when I'm wearing this ugly gown? I grinned back. Never. We both laughed. It felt so good to see him laughing again. He had been like that for over 2 weeks at that point, and he even started to insist that he was feeling better. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I stayed over that night. I wasn't allowed to be in his bed, but he insisted I climbed in beside him. So I did. In the dark, I examined him. He had lost a lot of weight. His collarbones and wrists more prominent than they had been at the start of the summer. Still, he looked beautiful. I would never see him as anything but beautiful. I love you, I whispered. I'm sorry. He raised a brow. Sorry? For what? Angel, you've been nothing but, well, an angel. I'm sorry for not speaking up back then, at Padre's office, I explained. Roman smiled. Forget about that. It's alright. I wasn't really mad about that, and even if I had been, you've totally made up for it. Angel, I love you too. He reached a thin hand out and took mine, bringing it up to his lips and kissing it. And I always will. Always, I whispered back, taking his other hand and kissing it the same way. The next morning, Roman was gone. I knew as soon as I opened my eyes and set my gaze on his face. I knew even before I checked for his pulse and his breathing, before I started reading the note that he had left for me on the bedside table. I'm sorry. I want to stay with you for as long as I can, but I can feel myself slipping away. So all I really want to say is, I love you. I love everything about you. I stopped. I realized I couldn't read it anymore. When had he written it? I couldn't tell. Had he known? Had he known that he wasn't going to get better at all? Had he known better than us that he had little life left, regardless of all the hopes people placed on him? But most of all, I wondered if he had known I loved him. I stared at Roman's face. He looked so peaceful, like he was just asleep and having a good dream. I took his cold hand and kissed it again, before kneeling beside his bed and sobbing my aching heart out. Conclusion. Summer ended and fall began with Roman's funeral. I attended with my parents. They didn't bring up the issue of my sexuality while I was grieving, mostly because anyone could see that I was completely unconsolable. I had only known him for a couple of months, but it felt like I lost a huge chunk of my soul. Eventually, the pain began to end. It never quite left, but I was able to overcome my grief. And while I knew my parents would never fully accept who I was able to accept myself. Roman had given me love, and with it, he had given me the freedom to live my life as myself, and for myself. And for that, I will always love him. The end. Have you ever lost someone to illness before? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and to stay wholesome.